This program is provided by Universal Genesis.
Okay, let's get into it. We have a massive deep dive today on something that might completely change how you think about the history of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to look at the real origin story of modern science, and our sources are pointing to this really unlikely and intense relationship between science and one philosopher, Aristotle.
That's exactly. And our mission today, for you, is to unpack a pretty radical idea. We tend to think of the scientific revolution as this, straightforward march of progress.
Right, just one discovery after another.
But the sources we have argue something very different, that modern science, the whole engine of progress we live with, is fundamentally an anti-Aristotle movement.
And this is the paradox. He was also somehow the giant cradle and maybe the best teacher science ever had.
Yes, that's the puzzle we need to solve.
I find that framing so compelling because it just cuts against the grain of the standard story we all get in school, that science was born from pure, unbiased observation. But what you're saying is that its real engine was, well, destruction. A deliberate, centuries-long project to tear down one guy's system of thought.
Precisely. The core argument, and this is kind of the secret history that gets glossed over, is that real scientific progress came from the impulse to deny Aristotle. Science didn't just move past him.
It was a rebellion.
It was a rebellion. Scholars weren't just looking for truth in a vacuum. They were systematically looking for evidence that would prove the Aristotelian worldview wrong. That destructive impulse is what defined the whole revolution.
So why so intense? Why couldn't someone like Galileo just, publish his findings and move on? Why did it have to be a war against Aristotle?
Well, it was a perfect storm, really. There were these huge external and internal pressures that made this systematic denial completely necessary. And it all kind of crystallizes after the year 1567.
Okay, so walk us through that. What's the first motivation? The political and religious one.
This is so crucial for context. By the middle of the 16th century, the entire intellectual world in Europe was dominated by Thomas Aquinas,
who had basically merged Aristotle's ideas with Christian theology.
He Christianized Aristotle, yeah. It made Aristotle the intellectual operating system for the entire continent.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 1567, the Catholic Church makes Aquinas' philosophy official church doctrine.
So if you're a Catholic thinker, Aristotle is the gold standard. He's the foundation.
Exactly. And here's the twist. For all the new Protestant nations, for any scholar who wanted to push back against the intellectual power of Rome, rejecting Aristotle became incredibly convenient.
So being anti-Aristotle was a shorthand for being anti-Catholic.
It was a proxy. So the search for truth, which was a noble goal, got all wrapped up in the political goal of destroying the other side's intellectual symbol.
That really raises the stakes. An astronomy debate suddenly has geopolitical weight.
It absolutely did. But there was another motivation, one that was maybe even more personal for the scholars themselves, and that was the academic one.
What do you mean?
Just imagine the university curriculum back then. It was just drowning in Aristotle. Everything, logic, physics, psychology, ethics, it was all taught through his texts.
He was the universal textbook.
So if you're a professor and you want to publish something new, or even just make a new observation, you have this huge bottleneck. It was basically impossible to introduce new knowledge unless you first discredited the required reading.
So it was a curriculum problem. You couldn't just add a new course on empirical astronomy. You first had to tear down the old Aristotelian one just to make space.
You had to create a world outside of Aristotle, as the sources put it, just to get your own work heard. And that, right there, created the research agenda.
Okay, so let's look at the specific targets, because this seems to be where the modern world was actually built. First up, the most obvious one, his cosmology, the geocentric model.
Right. Aristotle's authority made the geocentric model, Earth at the center, perfect crystal spheres. It wasn't just a theory, it was dogma.
And that became the thing to attack for Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler.
Exactly. They weren't just charting stars for fun. They were actively seeking evidence to prove Aristotle's perfect, unchanging cosmos was wrong. The heliocentric model, elliptical orbits. These are all direct results of a very focused anti-Aristotle research project.
So destruction led to creation.
Yes. But the really deep philosophical shift came with the next target, the destruction of teleology.
This is a huge one. This is where the universe goes from having a purpose to just being a machine. Remind us, what is teleology?
Teleology is the idea of a final cause. It's Aristotle's core idea that things in nature move toward a specific purpose or an end, a telos.
So a rock falls not because of gravity, but because its purpose is to get to the center of the Earth.
Exactly. Or a seed grows because its purpose is to become a tree. There's an intention built in everything. Modern science, with Newton, with the laws of thermodynamics, it just systematically erased that idea.
The world stopped being about what things were trying to do.
And it became about efficient cause. One thing bumping into the next. Measurable forces, measurable results. No purpose required. It's an incredible shift.
I mean, to take purpose out of the scientific universe, that's maybe one of the biggest ideas in all of history.
It is. And the final target was destroying the qualitative world. For Aristotle, reality was made of qualities. Hot, cold, heavy, dry, wet.
And science replaced that with the quantification revolution.
Right. Galileo, Descartes, Newton, they all basically said qualities are subjective. To know something for real, you have to be able to measure it as a number.
So you go from heavy to mass, from hot to degrees.
A total denial of Aristotle's way of seeing the world. They replaced a descriptive reality with a mathematical one.
Which brings us to the most iconic moment in this whole story. Galileo and the falling objects. We see it as a simple experiment, but it was really the symbolic execution of Aristotelian physics.
It really was. It was the moment the whole method changed. Aristotle's claim was very clear. Heavier objects fall faster because they more strongly seek the center of the Earth.
A teleological argument.
Totally. And Galileo's response was the act that created modern science. He basically said, forget reasoning about a rock's inner purpose. Let's just measure it.
That pivot from deduction to direct measurement, that's the whole game right there.
And it's amazing what that one experiment destroyed. First, like we said, the collapse of teleology. The law that everything falls at the same acceleration proved that a thing's purpose was totally irrelevant to its motion.
It's just mechanical.
Just mechanical. And second, it established the scientific method. Observation and measurement became the only way to find truth. That whole methodology is an anti-Aristotle product.
And this is where we see Aristotle's big flaw, right? Our sources point out he could have done this experiment. It wasn't hard.
No, it didn't require any advanced tech. But he didn't. And the reason, our sources argue, is because he was acting more like a director of the library than a scientist.
What does that mean?
His method of observation was about classification, about gathering examples that fit into his beautiful logical system. He was building a library of knowledge. He wasn't trying to falsify his own ideas.
He was cataloging, not testing.
Exactly. He loved his system so much he forgot to check if the basic data was right. And that one oversight was the crack that the entire scientific revolution burst through.
And when it did, it didn't just change ideas. It reshaped the entire intellectual infrastructure of Europe.
Fundamentally.
So how did this system of denial, how did it actually take over the universities?
Well, remember, the medieval university was built on Aristotle. But by the 17th, 18th centuries, you just had this string of undeniable successes from the anti-Aristotle movement.
Right. Newtonian physics worked. You could build better bridges, predict eclipses.
It produced results.
Yeah.
Demonstrable, verifiable results. And so the values that drove that movement, observation, experiment, measurement, they became the new source of intellectual authority.
And this led to the idea of positivism taking over the university.
Yes. For anyone listening, positivism is basically the idea that the only real, authentic knowledge is scientific knowledge.
If you can't prove it with empirical evidence or math, it's not real knowledge.
Which is the polar opposite of the Aristotelian system based on metaphysical reasoning.
So what you get is this total intellectual hijack. The university keeps the form of the old system.
Right. You still have faculties, degrees, lectures.
But the content gets completely swapped out. The anti-Aristotelian experimental science just fills the void, and that's how the old university becomes the modern positivist university we know today.
The vessel was kept, but the water was changed entirely.
Okay, so this brings us right to the core paradox. If science spent hundreds of years systematically destroying Aristotle, how on earth can he be called its giant cradle or the best teacher? It seems completely contradictory.
It does, but the key is that a brilliant destruction requires a brilliant foundation to destroy. Scientists weren't fighting against random, scattered ideas. They were fighting a coherent, massive, structured system.
And that system itself was his contribution.
It was. The sources point to 5 huge contributions. The first is the institution. Aristotle's school, the Lyceum, was the blueprint for the Western University. He literally built the house where the fight took place.
He laid the architectural plans?
Yeah.
Okay, what's the say?
The questions. This is more subtle. Modern scientists completely denied his answers, but they were using his questions.
What do you mean?
Questions like, what is motion? What is causality? What is change? What is the structure of the world? He framed the entire debate. He set the playing field.
So if he hadn't asked why do things move in such a systematic way, Newton wouldn't have known to look for the universal laws of mechanics.
Exactly. And that leads to the third point, which is just genius. The errors as a research agenda.
I love this idea.
The entire research plan for early modern science was just a list of Aristotle's errors. Denying that species are fixed, that was Darwin's whole career. Denying perfect circular orbits, that was Kepler.
He accidentally wrote the world's most comprehensive to-do list for future scientists.
He did. And because his errors were part of a coherent logical system, refuting them forced scientists to build an equally coherent logical system to replace it. It gave them a target. Wow. Okay, and the fourth contribution is about organization. The structure of knowledge. Yeah. His obsession with classification, with systematic knowledge, with logic, that provided the template for how modern science organizes itself.
So biology still uses systematic classification. Physics still looks for a unified theory.
They're using his template, but they filled it with non-Aristotelian evidence-based content. He gave them the blueprint for the filing cabinet, even if they threw out all the old files.
And the fifth and final one, this is the one our sources call his ultimate role as the best teacher.
He acted as the first person to build a GitHub for knowledge.
That's a perfect analogy.
It is. He didn't just write books. He created an open-source framework of thought. He implicitly invited everyone who came after him to fork it, modify it, destroy it, and rewrite it.
He built the first operating system for human thought, knowing it would eventually be replaced by a better version.
His success as a teacher isn't measured by him being right. It's measured by how successfully he provoked his students centuries later to go further than he did and prove him wrong. That's what a great teacher does.
So the big takeaway here is that progress isn't born from ignoring the past. It's born from methodically dismantling brilliant, systematic errors. The modern university is literally the ghost of Aristotle's system, just filled with anti-Aristotelian knowledge.
It was an act of both violent rejection and profound inheritance. Modern science had to crush the librarian Aristotle, but it could only do that because he had already built the cradle, asked the questions, and provided the beautiful systematic errors that needed to be fixed.
So, to leave you with a final thought, building on all this, if real scientific progress is fueled by finding and overturning the systematic errors of the past, what are the Aristotelian assumptions of our own time? What ideas that we take for granted in science and economics and politics are structuring our world right now, just waiting for the next revolutionary anti-movement to come along and prove them wrong?
This program is provided by Universal Genesis.